we're lucky to pick the right one. Thank you to Hollis, Omi, who did a lot of the planning and brought all the cookies for afterwards, and the whole committee for not only planning this event but all the events over the past week. Today we're going to talk about not so much klezmer during the Holocaust, but the effect the Holocaust had on klezmer music and the musicians who performed it. And hopefully it'll be about 50-50, me talking and us playing music. And before we start, I just want to recognize the great musicians here who, until we started this, I don't think any of them had ever played klezmer music and may not have listened to any klezmer music. So, but they're very talented musicians, put in a lot of work, and I think they sound pretty authentic. So the first place to start is, what is klezmer music? And the simple answer is, klezmer music is the traditional instrumental folk music of Eastern European or Ashkenazi Jews. Today we use the word klezmer to define a genre of music. You know, you're going to hear us play klezmer. But that's actually a fairly new way of using that word. Typically, the word klezmer actually refers to the musician. A klezmer plays klezmer music, and that's because the word klezmer is a combination of the Hebrew words kaleh and zamir, which mean vessel or tool of song. And so, supposedly the musician himself is the vessel, you know, through which the song flows. The most important function klezmerim being the plural of klezmer, played in Jewish life was to perform ritual wedding music. Weddings and wedding music comprise the core of the klezmer's repertoire. And, you know, we could spend all day just talking about wedding music, but we won't. We're just going to play a few examples and jump right in. The one example we're not going to play, but I wanted to include anyway, is just my absolute favorite wedding tune. It's called the Bruiges Tanz, which in Yiddish means angry dance. It's also sometimes called the mother-in-law dance, or the in-law dance. And the way it works is you start with the slow section. And usually you have the mother-in-laws, father-in-laws, some in-laws, and they spend that slow section walking around each other on the dance floor, giving each other very distasteful looks. And then at the end they do an up-tempo freilich, which freilich means happy. And both sides of the family join in and they dance together, and it's supposed to symbolize, you know, any feuds the two families had are now put aside because they're joined together in marriage. But that's just my absolute favorite. This first one we're going to play is called To Their Chuppah March 3, To the Wedding Canopy March 3. And that's typically how these were named. They were named by the function. So To the Chuppah was played when people were walking to the Chuppah. Would have been typically played while everyone was eating, while there wasn't a lot going on, and this is when the Klezmerim would play display pieces. Sometimes they were called tish nigunim, table music. They'd actually go around to tables and play. And this one is a doina. And a doina comes from Romania. It's semi-improvisational. So it's not all improvised. Usually there's stuff written out, but it's highly ornamented. And this one's called Gullerman's doina because it was collected from a man named Gullerman. Traditional before the waiters serve dessert to have a dance of their own. And so typically it was a share. This one isn't. But this one starts with a slow section. And this is very common in klezmer music. You pair slow with fast. It's a lot like Baroque music where you pair the slow and the fast movements. And so this starts slow and then ends with a fast freilich. The last piece we're going to play from the wedding repertoire is called Sei gesund, which, someone tell me what that means. I know there are people that... yeah, it's usually, it's something you say when you're saying goodbye to someone. You know, be healthy, go in good health. And that's exactly what this is. This is a farewell. It's a way for the Klezmerim to say, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Sometimes these pieces were called Dobranoc, which is Russian for good night, or Dobriden, which is Russian for good morning, or sometimes they were called Gut Morgen, Yiddish for good morning. And that's because a lot of times weddings went all the way to the next morning, through the night, so everyone was going home as the sun came up. So, you know, that kind of gives you a sampling. And what's interesting is you may be listening to these and thinking, well, how can you tell the difference between a Sarverstanz, a Sei gesund? And to be honest, looking at the music, you really can't. You can't tell the difference between a lot of them. But what's very interesting is the people who played them never would have mixed them. A Sarverstanz was played for the servers to dance to. A Sei gesund was played as a farewell. To the chuppah was played walking to the chuppah. You did not mix and match them. Weddings were a staple gig for Klezmerim. Weddings could last up to a week. And during that week, Klezmerim had a number of different... In exchange, they usually received ample food, pay, sometimes shelter if they weren't local. Plus, during the actual wedding, attendees would pay for dances. They'd pay for the Klezmerim to play certain tunes, which, you know, if we wanted to stick to tradition at the end of this. I'm not suggesting anything. In addition to weddings, Klezmerim also played Purim, at Purim spiels, Purim plays, and other simchas or celebrations within the Jewish community. They also frequently played for non-Jews. And what's interesting is despite their important role, their important function in Jewish society in the Old World, Klezmerim were seen as one of the lowest rungs of society because they traveled around all the time. They were seen as drunks and imagine the way we see jazz musicians. That's how people saw Klezmerim. You might like listening to their music. You don't want your daughter marrying one. The non-wedding repertoire that Klezmerim played was performed for both Jews and non-Jews. When it was performed for Jews, it was outside of the wedding. The non-wedding repertoire was influenced from multiple areas, but the biggest one was popular music. And so over the course of history, and there are records of Klezmerim going back into the 16th century, popular music has made its way in. So waltzes, mazurkas, non-Jewish folk songs, polkas, and other types of popular music made their way into the standard repertoire. And our next tune is going to be an example of that. Especially in the 1930s, and especially in Poland, the tango became very popular. And so that tango became incorporated into the klezmer repertoire and played with klezmer ornaments in some klezmer modes. And as is typical, like I said before, here you'll see the slower tango paired with a faster serba. And a serba, I know a lot of you are thinking, a serba typically has a lot of triplets in it. That's where the beat's divided into three. Da 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 da. This one doesn't. And it's because the guy who wrote it, Dave Terrace, one of the most famous klezmerim of the 20th century, was from a part of the Ukraine where serba was interchangeable with frela. And so it's just an upbeat, happy tune. So this will be a tango going right into a serba.